Welcome to Fueling Conversations, a Sport Nutrition Education Network podcast with Dr. James Fleming. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Jamie Salter, a senior lecturer at York St John University with expertise in sports science and strength and conditioning. Dr. Salter shares his research on growth and maturation in young athletes, diving into how these factors impact training load response, injury patterns, and overall performance. We discuss key challenges young athletes face, especially during growth spurts, and how innovative strategies like biobanding can help create a more level playing field for skill development. He also highlights the importance of monitoring growth, engaging with coaches and parents, and considering the psychological aspect of athlete development. Plus, we explore his work on his new app development to help key stakeholders assess maturation, as well as the pressing need for more research on girls in sports. It's a fascinating conversation packed with valuable insights for coaches, parents, and anyone interested in youth athletic development. Let's jump in. Hi, Jamie. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So today, guys, we're lucky to be joined by Dr. Jamie Salter. And as always, I'll just ask Jamie to introduce himself and we'll get cracking.
Hi, James. Hi, everybody. My name's Jamie Salter. I'm York St John University senior lecturer there. Predominantly teach on a sports therapy program, but my background is a strength and conditioning coach and sports scientist, having worked in football and rugby prior to coming into sort of teaching in a college-based setting and then progressing into higher education. So, currently researching growth, maturation, and its impact on athlete development.
Cool. So just for kind of the audience, I guess, like I'm interested in this space. Obviously, that's my kind of research area. But I saw Jamie put some really interesting posts up on LinkedIn. Like probably a lot of students, you see lots of academics and otherwise kind of saying what they do. And I was like, right, Jamie, I need to speak to this guy because it's some cool bits. So can we just go before we get into the research space, because that's what the focus of this chat is. Can you kind of give us a little bit more in terms of that football and rugby, that what you were doing and who you were working with and how that kind of sparked that interest?
That's a good place to start, because that is where my interest in this whole really started, really from the applied field. So I'm like a lot of people, a failed athlete myself. I wanted to be an athlete when I was younger, and when I realized I wasn't going to do that, I thought, well, how can I get as close to being an athlete as possible? So went to university, did a sports science degree and masters in strength and conditioning, and then ended up working. My first job was at Barnsley Football Club, straight out of my undergrad, and then ended up progressing into other posts in rugby league. So where I'm from, York Knights Rugby League Club, I worked there for a few years, and then progressed on to Middlesbrough Football Club, which is probably my longest stint at a particular club, but also the most fulfilling kind of applied experience I had. It was a really good place to work, great people, and I learned so many lessons there, particularly around the growth and maturation space. So my role there was working with the 12 to 16 year olds. So obviously that's right in the hot period of growth, and I just was working there from an S&C perspective on the pitch, but also in the gym, working with medical professionals, sports scientists, coaches, all everybody really. And I just kind of saw these patterns with players, the same sort of issues at the same time, year on year when I was there, and that made me really interested in this. And I informally kind of did some CPD with the staff around growth and maturation, and how maybe as an academy we could deal with it better. And that coincided with some teaching I was doing at the time, where I was working in a college and wanted to progress to a university, and having a PhD is kind of like the entry level into that field. So it just aligned really nicely that I was interested in growth and maturation, needed to do a PhD really to progress my primary career at the time. So yeah, that's where it landed. And it was really from seeing the patterns in individuals and how them having these issues, and me just thinking we should be able to do this better. I think the field of growth and maturation was inexperienced then. It's moved on a lot in that time. This was sort of 2015 time, so maybe 10 years ago. Definitely a lot's changed in that time, and knowledge has improved, and hopefully I've contributed to that, but there definitely lots of others have as well.
Can you touch on some of those problem issues or challenges that you were faced at Middlesbrough, and kind of for the audience?
So we would have I was in a boys' environment, but we would have boys coming in and they would reporting soreness in key areas, which are now known to be real hot spots for that. So heel pain, knee pain, lower back, hip related issues. and it was kind of there was a trend in terms of like, the under 13s would get lots of foot and ankle related problems, and that would progress up the body. They wouldn't necessarily miss time out of their training, so they would turn up, and we'd have to modify their load in some way, whether it be gym or pitch based. But they would consistently have these problems going on and on. So from us as a medical and sports science team would modify their loads, work with them, but we probably didn't work proactively enough. We were very reactive at the time, as in we waited till the symptoms were there. It was only really since that time that now I think clubs are acting proactively, tracking players in advance and thinking about how they can maybe manage loads ahead of time rather than wait until the red flag issues pop up. That was what we were, that was my kind of thinking. And surely we should plan for this if we see it every year.
I guess it's just such a loaded space though, right? Because it kind of almost feels like so nuanced that everyone's going to go through growth and maturation at different phases, which I'm sure we'll get into, what those symptoms might be,
Mm.
how they are protected or not, or the experience of the MDT or
Yeah.
coaches' pressures, parents' pressures, their own pressures. It becomes almost like an overwhelming beast to a degree.
Yeah.
And there's so much pressure, particularly probably more pressure to some degree in young academy sports people than there is in maybe in the professional game once they've made it and they've got a 5-year contract or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's such, I mean, we talk about that pressure. And obviously all of this, if you think about what happens through puberty, and this for males and females, obviously they're slightly different times, but for males and females, they're going through the biggest physical changes that anybody experiences. We obviously from birth you have huge changes, but then once you sort of older, and those changes happen so rapidly during puberty, but that's superimposed on life stress. So particularly for girls, they have their main growth spurt around 11ish, 11, 12, but they also change schools at the same time. That year they probably change schools, so the whole social network changes. That kind of sense of security of being the oldest in your primary school to being the youngest in secondary school changes. Obviously all the social elements that come with that, new friendship groups, body image issues, all of these things happen all at the same time. But then when you're an elite athlete, like you say, you've then got the every 6 to 12 week reviews that the clubs would do on your performance. You are basically being appraised every 3 months. Are you going to stay in the academy? Are you going to move on? So that the anxiety and the stress that comes with that. I mean, a lot of the psychosocial issues that have been reported in these groups about burnout, about anxiety, and all other things are really prevalent because it is such a stressful environment. But I think the communication around growth and maturation, if you can communicate that and work proactively in terms of monitoring it, but then communicate that with coaches, with players, with parents, I think that can, reduce some of that anxiety because people know where they are.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And I think the world of just my little experience, but in sports science, people are having those conversations and keeping all the stakeholders involved more than perhaps maybe used to be maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Can we delve into the inquiry, I guess, like the PhD topic area, what you decided to focus in on? We're not going to go down the whole journey because we'll be here forever, but we'll focus in on the key ones there.
Yeah, so my topic, I just try and think of the title. I think it was training load responses in youth athletes. The role of biological maturation was that. So I was really interested in and still am interested. I still pursue this now. The way in which athletes respond to exercise based on their maturity. So what you'll typically see within sports in the youth space is that coaches, and this is no slight on any coaches because I've done this myself as a coach, is that you put on a training session, you run a training session, and you expect everybody in that training session to respond in the same way. But even that doesn't happen at adult levels. Like, if we went for a 5K run, James, we'd do the same distance, but we wouldn't respond in the same way based on loads of factors that contribute to that. So, but when it's with children, we put on sessions and we expect them to respond in exactly the same way. But actually, the variation and the diversity within that group, within an age group, is so broad, 4, 5, 6 years in some cases, that in some cases the session's too hard, and in some cases it's too easy. So they're not really adapting at either end of the spectrum, and that's kind of what I pursued. So I looked at practices around that. So do people monitor this stuff? Do they monitor training load? Do they monitor growth and maturation within predominantly football academy settings? looked at maybe the methods that people should use to predict when people are having their growth and maturation, different stages of that, and then looked at some of the acute and chronic responses to exercise as a result, and found out that, yeah, honestly, people don't respond in the same way, and actually we could be quite damaging in terms of a training load response in relation to injury if we don't maybe adopt a maturity conscious approach.
It's a really interesting one. I think what I'd like to spend some time on, if you're happy to, is that a prediction of peak height velocity, which I know a lot of sports scientists and multidisciplinary teams like to use, and anthropometry comes into that. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into why it's important, or how we can use that prediction to help with trainability, with athlete management? Because I know, looking at the models, for example, that you've got lots of speculation, or maybe just from my lack of knowledge, that when we hit our peak height, we can actually adapt better, and that's when people often go, well, we'll give them more, and that's when we get stronger and quicker and those sorts of things. But actually, it can be quite a fine balance.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And so in terms of the importance of measuring it, it is important because of you can adopt that proactive approach. So you can, and there's some simple tools out there. I developed a spreadsheet a few years ago that's freely accessible for people to just punch in some numbers, and it gives them that. We have recently launched an app called Maturity Monitor, which is available on the App Store, and you can download it. Parents, teachers, coaches can download this now, put in some numbers in terms of height, sitting height, and body mass, and it will give you an estimation of where your child is at. That's often been the problem, is the accessibility to those equations, as in, even for someone who's done a PhD, they're quite difficult to understand and interpret. So what we've tried to do with this app is remove that so that it becomes more accessible, so that the everyday coach can now start to understand this a bit better, but also try and intervene where possible. So measuring it's really important, because if you know where your athletes are in terms of their growth and maturation, and you understand maybe some of the key points of each phase, it doesn't mean you have to fully understand it. But if you're understanding that, as they go through the growth spurt, they're probably going to lose coordination. They're probably going to be sore in one or more places, and they might need a little bit longer recovery time because their body's growing. So from a nutritional perspective, James, the amount of food that they need to fuel that growth, but then you're doing quite often like frequent exercise on top. It's quite a number of calories that you need to consume. So having that nailed down and understanding that as a parent or a coach is really important. But then in terms of the trainability, there are certain things that children just aren't prepared to do. So children really struggle to use fast twitch muscle fibers. They're generally quite aerobic, and that changes more as we go through puberty. So we can recruit our fast twitch muscle fibers. Our tendons become more like they do when they're adult like. So we can, all of a sudden, these strength and power based activities that we can do become more trainable. But you're right. If you see that as a window where we go, right now they're ready and now they're ready, when actually they've got quite a skeletally fragile frame, and then we start loading them with all this strength and power based stuff, we might end up rearing its ugly head from an injury perspective. So it's maybe spending time before the growth spurt, developing good habits from a movement perspective, good movement quality, using the neuroplasticity that children have. Develop good habits, try and maintain that as much as you can as they go through bodyweight exercises or sensible progressions, competency based. And then maybe once they come out the other side of the growth spurt, they're maybe more adaptive from a hormonal perspective. This is boys and girls, but particularly boys because of the amount of testosterone that they have, to be able to grow from a strength and speed perspective. But that obviously needs to be progressed in a sensible and controlled manner, rather than just going, right, now's the time, let's pile it on.
Really interesting. I've got two questions that come to mind on this one. One is the principle behind biological banding, and I know that's something that maybe you can introduce that concept and where we are with that. And then the second one is about late maturation and late maturers, and particularly in professional sport or in sport in general. Do you know much around kind of dropout rate, or are we missing people as a result of that? And is there any insights from there? So two pretty different questions, but if we can have a go.
Yeah, no, so I'll go with the biobanding first. So Biobanding is emerging as a tool that practitioners can use. So it's not new. It's been around for a long time, and it's used in, boxing is a biobanded sport really, and other weight classification sport are a form of biobanding. So it's not a new premise, but it's being used more recently in this population because of its ability to reduce that variance. So what you're doing when you're biobanding, instead of playing children in their age groups, so particularly, for girls, sort of 10, 11, 12 is a really diverse period of time. In boys, it's 13, 14, 15, where you really start to get late and early maturers competing against each other. What this biobanding does is it reduces that variability. So you're playing players that are similar stages of development against each other. That doesn't mean that they're all the same height or all the same build. You still get tall and smaller kids playing against each other, but it reduces that variability in the way that kids then feel like they can play in a different way in their sport. If you're a late developer who doesn't have the physicality to maybe run past somebody because you're not quick enough and they're an early developer, you probably don't do that. So you probably look to pass the ball in your sport. Whereas if you bioband it, suddenly these children do have the potential to run past people. So they might, with a rugby ball, try and break the line rather than pass the ball, or in football they might try and take someone on. So that it changes the technical aspect of the game and allows people to try something new. But equally, from a late perspective, an early maturer, they might always use their physicality to dominate matches. Whereas all of a sudden you put them up against other players who are of a similar physical capability, they have to find other ways. So it can bring on both ends of the spectrum from their technical and tactical understanding of the sport. So it is being used. It probably will never replace age group sports, but it's a really nice supplement to that periodically throughout the season to allow children to try things differently.
I think I know some academies have biobanding days, and
Yeah.
like you say, it kind of celebrates that skill rather than just pure strength. Because I always tell the same story. It's probably worth telling here. You probably all the audience and yourself will probably have stories when you go to secondary school, and there's one lad, one of my mates actually, who was just really hairy, and I was like, all of a sudden, what, he's 11 years old, he was super slow. He
Yeah.
matured super early. We literally made a play based on his name in rugby, gave him the ball, he ran, scored
Yeah.
tries 90% of the time. And then
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
both Achilles aged 21. Well, we don't know if it's linked. We probably think it is.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one. You always think about that kind of how that physical prowess is used. And that's a secondary school where, there wasn't major pressure on us winning any rugby matches.
Yeah.
And I guess when it comes to the academy, there might be a conflict there between, yes, I know academy is about growth and development and holistic development in terms of players for the future. But there is also, an element of competition. And, we want to win. You want to build confidence and you want to kind of show your academies doing really well, and that one of those metrics is winning matches.
Yeah.
However you want to look at things, so that can be quite tricky, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that there is a conflict there, and some academies get it right, and see the aim of long-term athlete development is that your athletes are best when they're growing into an adult. So I think the competition element probably comes in 17, 18, that kind of post-school era where actually winning probably does matter a little bit, whereas before that, some academies have some sporting pathways have really good cultures whereby they understand that winning at 12 or 13 years old is not the main. Obviously it's nice to win, everybody likes to win, whereas maybe in some academies the balance isn't quite right. But I think having that is really important, and whether you mentioned about your friend there, that happens, but that's not beneficial for anybody, like in turn. I mean, obviously you won games
He
and
loved it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's fun, and as part of your school, memories, that's great. But in terms of developing good athletes, it's the team that are being scored against are not enjoying that, and might end up, you referred to drop out before, but then also the players that are doing the scoring, they're not benefiting from it really, tactically or technically.
No,
They're
no.
just using their physical attributes to steamroll over people, and yeah, it depends which side of the fence you sit on, the long-term athlete development or the performance, and I guess yeah, what you're in it for. That's
It's an interesting one. I guess in terms of these biobanding days, for those that might be thinking, okay, I've never really heard of it, would it be able to use that maturation monitor app and your
yeah.
spreadsheet to maybe do that, and then you can kind of see how you go, and then just try it in a session, or
Yeah. Yeah, so when we did one, we held one here at the university prior to Christmas, and we used the spreadsheet. mainly because the app is great if you've got a child or two or maybe a team that you're monitoring. We had like 150 kids in a day, so to put them into the app and then use the data, it was just easier to put it into a spreadsheet. So while someone was measuring them, we would type it straight in. So that was better for us. But they're both freely available, so depending on your circumstances. But yeah, we measured them in the morning. They played chronological age groups in the morning, and then that gave us time whilst the team was resting to measure their height and weight. And then at lunchtime, we regrouped them. And then in the afternoon, we banded them up so they played within different biobanding groups, and that worked really well. And it is something we definitely saw a change. We're going through the data now, and the studies will be published from that. But the parents enjoyed it, the players enjoyed it. We had some scouts here looking at the players in the morning versus the afternoon, and we were looking at comparisons between what they found. It's really interesting stuff, and it definitely does change the way in which the game's played. Not so much the technical, the physical attributes. We've noticed there's probably not much change in the running distances or anything like that, but it's more in which the way the game's played.
That's interesting. Is this football specifically, this
Yeah,
research?
sorry, I should have said football. Yeah,
And that's interesting with the way that the game's evolving, right? Where it's more
yeah,
about movement patterns, triangles, and playing out from the back and all those sorts of things. Obviously, it spills down into the grassroots layers, which
yeah.
then in principle should lean more on skill rather than that physical prowess, even though there's them two obviously complement each other as you
Yeah.
progress up the levels.
Yeah, there's depending on your philosophy within a football environment, but a lot of teams, try to control the game where they maybe move a team over to one side of the pitch to create space on the other side, and then they might play a long pass to exploit that space. But if you've got an individual that hasn't got the physical strength, but it falls to them and the opportunity is right to play the long pass, but they don't have the confidence in their physical ability to do that because they can't kick it far enough. That's not a technical problem that child has. They might understand what's wanted from them, and maybe in training they might try that pass, but they just don't have the physical capabilities to execute what the coach is wanting. But maybe in 6 months or 12 months time that they would have. So it's not their understanding or their technical proficiency that's a problem. It's just that they don't have the physical capacity to do what's being asked. So therefore, biobanding can buy these children time, or making the coach aware of these physical attributes. It can allow coaches to understand why they're not doing stuff, or why they might be playing in a certain way.
And I'm wondering, I know we've kind of taken a shift away from professional sport, but I'm wondering whether there's a space to adopt these strategies in schools. Because if we think about just a health, well-being perspective and actual, getting involved in sport and staying involved in sport or physical activity, however you want to look at it, we know dropout rates, particularly in females, but also in males, is huge around 14, 15, maybe even below that. And also
Yeah,
with social media and all these other things, it's only going to make things worse. So
yeah.
is there a way that we could adopt this, perhaps in PE teachers or those spaces where, we want to try and get people to have these lifelong habits? We've already established that those first 2 decades of life are huge in terms of the psychosocial aspects. But have you seen anything in that space?
No, so I know there is some work going on. There's a company called Podium Analytics, which is attached to Bath University, and Sean Cumming, his work. They are developing resources for teachers and parents within that space, because that is, I think academies have it right at some levels. There is a system there, but this affects every kid. Whatever level, whatever sport, everyone goes through it. So it's one of those things that can influence so many individuals out there. So getting that into mainstream schools is beneficial. One of the reasons we developed the app is to make that more accessible. All of a sudden now parents and teachers can do this. I think the school PE system is tricky anyway, isn't it, in terms of what children get. And if you then start to add biobanding or something similar into that, I think it's difficult. I do think there is a role that it could be played for GCSEs.
Yeah.
I know that from experience doing a PE, in GCSE PE, you're graded on your performance in some sports, and actually you might end up with a grade that is lower based on maturity, as in like you might not do very well at your sport that you're using because you might be a late developer. So
Yeah.
actually, if teachers considered your maturity status into the grading of that, that's probably a better reflection for some people. As in, like, some people would do better because they're just more mature and able to handle the demands of that sport. Others might get a lower grade which is overlooking the fact that they're probably behind in their maturity. So potentially that's an area.
I also think it's kind of an important education piece that could be part of curriculum, right? So, I mean, you might hate sport and that's fine, and you might just be someone who wants to stay fit and healthy, but that kind of early exposure in secondary school can often
Mm.
be enough. That first few sessions about, oh, well, I can't do this. That person's running around me. It's embarrassing. Or, I can't do team sports. And this whole narrative that gets set, or you get put into different sets, right? Which happens all the time. You're at the bottom set, so it's really hard to get up.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
not seeing because it's one PE teacher and 300 members in the class. So really, even if you play Sunday league or Saturday league for teams, it's really hard. And the parent rings in and says, my son should be in, my daughter should be in the team. Well, that's enough to potentially have a long-term effect. I wonder whether it's
yeah.
just an education piece and more that can be said on this, because I don't think everyone knows. Obviously, we're interested in this area, but I think it could potentially be something that could be more broadly applied as well.
Yeah, I think um, having knowledge is power, really, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But for the individual themselves, they may not understand that they're a late or an early maturer. So giving them the power, that empowering them with that knowledge, understanding what that might mean for them, maybe some of the things that they could focus on that other people can't, or that they should focus on, or why they might be doing well or not so well. I definitely think that is something that can enhance and reduce anxiety and all the negative, psychological association, like identity and all of that sort of thing that go with this. I think it's a big space. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely something that needs work.
And I think that's where there's a real drive for kind of holistic research, and that's where again one of my reasons I was keen to talk to you, Jamie, was that obviously your angle you're coming from. I'm very much early career researcher, interested in this space, but the angles we can come from. You've identified injury, and you've
Yeah,
touched on nutrition and the amount of food that's needed there, and the complexities associated with body image and food and all those sorts of things.
yeah,
But then there's a psychological arm and parents and carers and schools and all of a sudden you've got lots of scope, but there also needs to be like almost a team in here that can try and kind of answer some of these questions. Because anecdotally, we probably know some of them, but I
yeah,
think there could be some really important wins here. Hopefully, watch this space. But going back to that kind of elite or kind of academy environment and more to that injury standpoint or kind of holistic athlete care, what kind of key approaches do you think for those that might be new to these environments they can take
yeah.
on top of using some form of spreadsheet or app? What day-to-day things do you think could have an impact for those working in this space?
Yeah, I think obviously if you know where your individuals are from their growth and maturation, that's the first step. And then obviously recognizing some of the key symptoms with each stage. So from an injury perspective, what we tend to see is that injuries form a distal to proximal nature. So your extremities, your hands and your feet, they grow first, and then it progresses up the long bones. So at the start of the growth period, you get wrist or foot related problems. That then moves up towards the knee and then the hip and spine. So depending on the stage of that individual, you can put some interventions in place to work on those areas to make them robust. But I think having a good neuromuscular training program in place, which is just exposure to, it doesn't have to be full S&C like gym based, but just having exposure to good movement patterns in warm-ups early on, really early on, as young as you could possibly start, from body weight movements, and then just adapting that as they go through. So trying to work on movement competency, embedding that in place, and then obviously when the time is right, and if you have access to implement some more robust S&C as they're ready for that, I think. But understanding the growth patterns, the symptoms, and where they are in that is really important for practitioners.
I love that. And I guess to kind of just to summarize now, where are your next steps of inquiry kind of from a research standpoint? 'Cause it seems like you're doing a bit of research as well as trying to bring that to life both at your university and outside. Um,
Yeah, yeah. We like there's that argument, isn't it? As a researcher of obviously you want to do more research, but you also want to impact the people that it has with the previous research. So when you do some research, you find something out, you go, I now need to get this out to people. So there's that kind of mixture between the applied field and the new research. So we're working. There's very little on girls in this space. Really, there's not in an elite level, but nothing at grassroots level. So we're going to try and do some studies with girls. We did a study last year where we looked at girls and like their performance in strength tests. That's published. Had another one recently accepted. So the girls space is improving on this, but we'd like to know more about how growth and maturation affects girls and their response to workloads. So you know, obviously girls develop in a different way to boys. The body composition changes through puberty. So we, at the minute, we suspect that growth and maturation might be beneficial for girls, as in going through the puberty like it is for boys and the early selection bias. But we don't know that. We're kind of just assuming that that's the case. But actually, girls change in a different way. So they may not be as beneficial. They may not benefit as much after the growth spurt. So we're going to maybe try and look at that and how they respond to load. And then just try and grow this app. That's what we're trying to do, is make this app more robust, try and make it where people can maybe start putting test scores in there so they can start getting information about where their individuals are from a maturity / performance perspective. And yeah, just lots of exciting projects like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I'll definitely share the spreadsheet and the app on the bio for sure. And then if you're happy to share that, the link to the girls' work too. I guess it just made me think just the kind of breadth of potential here. Like you're mentioning, I'm assuming this is focused predominantly on team sports at the moment, because
Yeah, yeah.
when
I
we start
mean,
looking at individual sports like gymnastics, where rotational advantages from a young kind of maybe prepubescent body, like all of a sudden there might be a shift in focus there, and it just becomes a really interesting space.
well,
Yeah,
that's a good example because there has been a little bit of work in gymnastics where probably being a late maturer is a beneficial factor because of the aesthetics and because of the physical changes that happen with puberty. Is probably not ideal for gymnastics or dance. You could probably overcome that, as obviously we have Olympic athletes that are way beyond puberty, but being a late maturer is probably seen as a benefit in those sports, whereas it's the other way around in strength and power dominant sport, team-based sports, particularly for boys. So yeah, there's so much scope. I mean, there's nothing in track and field. Some really interesting stuff, James, around you know, track and field. There was a swimming study in Australia, and obviously swimming is a time and a distance. So the quicker you do that distance, the better you are at your sport. But if you're an early maturer, of course you're going to do distances quicker, and it's the same in track and field. So rebalancing scores and performance scores based on growth and maturation and actually correcting those values might help performance talent pathways actually recruit players differently. So, like rather than it being all the early maturers that dominate in these time-based sports, actually, if you correct their scores based on their maturation status, you might start to see more late developers progress in those time-dominant sports.
what a nice thing that can easily be done in the world where, sports science and data is driving performance and choices and decisions.
Yeah,
If we can, if maybe on your app, for example, we can plug it in with ease, that we
yeah,
can just take this alongside what we don't normally do, and then over time create our own data set which shows us something, then that is quite straightforward in terms of an application perspective, and yet
yeah,
can perhaps after you've been through a cycle indicate where your top performers are coming from.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's
exactly.
really good, and it's really nice to see kind of that clarity between where the research is, what we want to do, what you want to do, and then the application in the space. So yeah, I mean, we could talk about this all day, and I'm sure we will. And I know we're catching up soon for an event, but thanks so much for your time. I think I will definitely direct everyone towards the app and have a go myself. And yeah, look forward to catching up soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers, James.